Hey, I'm Dirty Dan, and welcome back to Greasy Boy Customs. On today's episode, we're going to go over some wiring troubleshooting for your hot rod or custom that you may have at home. We're going to go over different testing devices and different ways to power, load test, and check for resistance and voltage on your circuit. Let's get started. So now all of you at home that are working on your own custom car, motorcycle, or existing project and you're just doing some maintenance or repairs, you may run into an issue with the electrical system that you may not know which tool to use or how to use it, or you're having kind of a weird issue and you think you know what's wrong but you're not sure. And that's what we're going to go over. We're going to go over test lights, multimeters, and we're going to show you a way to load test, check for voltage drop. These things are all very important, and once you understand these, it'll help you tremendously. We're going to go ahead and use my 31 Ford Roadster that I've been working on, and we're going to go with using the electric fan as our failed item. Let's dive into it. First things first, let's talk about some of the items we're going to be using. Here I have my digital multimeter. Now this one is much larger than you may use at home. I brought this one in just so it was easier to read on the screen. We're also going to be using a test light. I'm going to tell you about the different options and when to and when not to use a test light. And then we're going to show you a cool little trick with these Milwaukee batteries. So let's say you're at home working on your project and your battery's dead, or you just want to bench test something. You can use your 12-volt power tool battery. If you look at the top of these Milwaukee batteries, there's two terminals. One is positive, one is negative. So I take my batteries and label them. And all you have to do is just take a regular male blade connector, which I'll show you in a second, and slide them in here, and you can power most of the devices on your 12-volt vehicle. If you look at the battery, I have it labeled with the ground and positive. You just need a regular male blade terminal like this, and it will slide right into there without damaging anything. Now keep in mind, if there's no fuse in line, you may run into problems. It's a good idea to put an inline fuse in here. Things first, we're going to go ahead and connect our ground lead going to our fan and make sure the fan works. And there we go, the fan is working, but your fan doesn't work. So what we're going to do first is we're going to check the connections and the fuse. You want to go to all your connections and make sure they are secured all the way. You want to make sure that there's no corrosion or any kind of rust on your connections, and if there is, clean those first. Then you want to move on to your fuse. Now your fuse has the two little terminals on top for you to check it. Just because it illuminates your test light does not mean that that fuse is not damaged. Most standard test lights just illuminate whenever you're checking. If they illuminate while you're checking for power, then you assume there's 12 volts. Well, that is actually not correct. Just because it illuminates does not mean that it has 12 volts. If you're going to use a test light, try to get one with a digital readout that shows you the voltage. This is the safest bet. Another caution with test lights is this tip right here. It's very pointy and you are going to be very tempted to poke through the insulation of a wire and stab the wire to find the voltage on it. Don't do that, because you know what happens? You leave that hole. You don't go back, you don't wrap it with heat shrink, you don't clean it up. Next thing you know, it gets exposed to the elements, you get water intrusion, you get corrosion, and it's going to eat away at that wire after a while. All right, quick recap. Don't stab your wires. You can use a test light, but be careful and make sure you're actually getting 12 volts. Invest the extra money in one that has a readout of the voltage. The preferred method, though, is the multimeter. Now we know our fuse is not blown at this point. We know that our wires are nice and tight. So the next step is to disconnect whatever device you're checking. Again, in this case, it's the fan. You want to set it to DC, and you want to take your two leads and you want to check and see if you have voltage. We'll put the ground in the ground, and then we're going to attach it to the positive. And if you can see on the meter there, we're reading 12.1 volts. So you've got voltage, but now, why is your fan still not working? Well, that's where a load test comes in, and you can use something as simple as a sealed beam headlamp to load test. Let me show you how that works. We've got 12 volts at our fan, but our fan's still not coming on. So you need to apply a load and be able to measure it. There's a couple different ways you can do this. First, you can take a sealed beam headlamp. Now there's only 3 wires on a sealed beam headlamp. You have a ground, you have a high beam, and a low beam. I like to take a sealed beam headlamp and put connectors on it that I can use to plug in and test loads. So you can hook your ground to the ground off your fan, and then you're going to take the high beam wire, hook it to your 12-volt source. Hey, look at that, the light comes on nice and bright. So if you've got voltage there and the light comes on, that means your fan has failed. Now let's say the light doesn't come on. Let's check that. We've got our meter tied in. Our black ground lead is tied into the ground for our fan, and we've also got the ground wire from the headlight on there as well. You can see ground, ground, ground. Then we're going to move over to the positive side. We've got our meter lead hooked to the positive for the fan power, and then we've got our positive wire for our headlamp, the load. So let's say you're reading 12 volts and then you go to connect your load, and all of a sudden the voltage drops after you apply your load. Now typically what that means when you take your load away and it's restored is that you have a poor connection. So you trace out your wires and you look for damaged areas. There we go, we found our poor connection. Now obviously this is just set up for the example and yours won't look like that. That's going to wrap this up. This is just a small little step into the kind of stuff that you run into when wiring or repairing wiring on your vehicle. Now, one thing I didn't mention earlier is test lights do have another danger. If you're using it on a newer modern vehicle, something with computers, don't. Because you can actually make the test light complete a circuit or ground a circuit out that does not need to be and fry something. If you're working on newer vehicles, use a multimeter. So, you know not to stab the test light into the wires. You know to get things like back probe connectors or use a safety pin to test the terminals. You can use a power tool 12-volt battery, just like a car battery, to test certain circuits. Make sure you put an inline fuse in there. You can use a digital multimeter to watch the voltage drop when you apply the load, and you can use something as simple as a sealed beam headlight to test your circuitry. Again, if you've got voltage and the light comes on, your circuit's fine. If you have voltage and the light does not come on when you apply the load, likely that your device has failed. This is not tried and true with everything that's going on, but in general, this is a great practice and may save you a little bit of headache. If you have any questions at all, you can email me at greasyboycustoms@gmail.com right down here. I'll be glad to try to help you the best I can. Or if you have any of your own tips or suggestions or tricks that you'd like to share with everybody, comment below. Let everybody know. Thank you for joining me. Happy hot rodding.